Good morning, students from Organized Crime. This is Schwaner. I am your professor, if you don't already know that. And there will be I don't expect for there to be anybody in attendance since this class is asynchronous, which simply just means that we won't be doing live stream. I won't be teaching you during a specific time period during the week. However, I will be posting these videos in your announcements in the Blackboard system. So you're going to have to watch this, and basically what we're going to do today is I'm just going to kind of introduce the class to you, as well as give you a little bit of a theoretical backdrop on how to approach your assignment for next week, which is due next Sunday at 11:59 p.m. And basically what I'm going to do during this telecast is I'm going to give each of you a city that you'll have to do research on so that you can write a 1 to 2 page paper. While I'm doing that, let me just say that there are going to be 2 video links. They're already in your syllabus, which is fine, and you can look those up. But I'm also going to provide those in your announcement board too. The first paper is called How to Write a Great Paper, and basically what I do in that video is I kind of show you how to construct a great paper, how to go from just an idea to from scratch, going into an outline, going into a well-written document. The example that I give you in that class, in that video, is an example of an academic approach to papers, which is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for you to describe for me Al Capone in Chicago. I'm not really interested in that. But what I am interested in is what is the context that gave rise to Al Capone's power? How did his influence and his symbolic nature become something that was so star-like back in the 1930s, right? So what I really want you to do is I want you to take a look at the structural phenomenon of how organizations and organized crime arose. Now, speaking of structure, you have your textbook, but there's a video that I produced also for all my classes, and it's also called Who Am I? And in that assignment, really what I'm doing is I'm showing you how you as an individual are embedded in the culture and the society in which you live. Because this class, look, this class is nice in the sense that it pertains to organized crime. That's fantastic. You know, we're going to learn about the mafia, the robber barons. We're going to take a look at it from a global perspective. And you're going to walk out with a broad-based understanding of organized crime. Really, you're going to come up with a broad-based understanding of business. It's like almost like getting a business degree for free when you take this particular class. And by the way, when you take a look at that video, Who Am I?, which I'm going to put into the links, that video really does say how you're embedded in society. And if you take a look back historically, if you look at the wealthiest people ever live in the United States, all those persons essentially acquired their wealth through organizational systems. Right? In other words, they didn't just do it on their own. Yeah, that's terrific. But they also built huge coalitions. They had organizations. They had companies. They had a lot of them lied and cheated. I mean, when you read about the robber barons, you're going to find that the greatest fortunes ever amassed in the United States. Forget about Jeffrey Bezos and forget about Bill Gates and those guys. They only had a fraction of the wealth that these guys would have had back in the late 1800s. The robber barons. So when you take a look at Cornelius Vanderbilt and you take a look at Standard Oil and all the train moguls, you're going to find that, like the Carnegies or what have you, you're going to find that great fortunes were amassed through a lot of shady and unethical behaviors, a lot of which are completely illegal to do today. So in other words, what you're going to see, I hope, is that you are really embedded in a structure. And a structure is, just to give you a quick definition, a structure really is a pattern of behavior. That's all it is. It's a pattern of behavior. But an overlapping system of patterns of behavior, for example, one of the patterns of behavior that you engage in every single day is consumption. You go into a store, you work for money, you take the money, and you purchase something of value, and then you put it in your bag and you walk out, right? That's consumption. That is a structure. You know, if we lived in a society based upon strictly bartering, you'd walk in, say, hey, I'll milk a cow for you, and you walk out with the product. Now we're getting to a point where with the digital economy, you walk in, you walk out, because of Amazon, which is a different type of exchange system. But the point is that it's all pattern behavior, and that's the key that you want to take a look at. What are the patterns that create the system in which people make their decisions? Because decisions don't just happen. It's not like you just sit there and all of a sudden you decide, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go whack somebody. No, there's a broader context in which people whack other people, right? So when we take a look at organized crime, we're basically going to be taking a look at what are the underlying structures that impact the way in which people make their decisions and become a member of an organized syndicate, right? Now, I'm going to start with a little theory. I don't mean to get into theory, but the class isn't terribly difficult. Basically, you have two mini papers. You have a mini paper on the mafia, or not the mafia, organized crime in an American city, all right? And then you have a second paper, and I'm going to give you your city today, so you're going to want to stay tuned all the way through. But what you're going to do is you're going to take a look at that city, and you're going to say, Akron? Akron? I don't even know where Akron is, let alone write a paper about the mafia in Akron. Let me tell you what, the mafia in Akron was huge. It was strong, and it was violent, and they controlled Northwest Ohio pretty strong, just like in Cleveland, right? So, like, a lot of you automatically think, when you're thinking of organized crime, you're thinking of New York, you're thinking of Chicago. Let me tell you what, it was pretty significant in Detroit, Kansas City, you know, Las Vegas and places like that, New Orleans. And if you take a look at some of the organized crime now, you know, with human trafficking and all those type of issues, you know, the Russian mafia is very strong here in Miami, you know, but they're very underground. So when we take a look at these particular cities, you're going to find that each city had its own dynamic. Each had its own structural relationship to the method by which organized crime rose to the forefront. And you're also going to find that organized crime, when done well, not to espouse crime, generates a lot of revenue. It's a business, and if you think of it as a business, it's going to generate profits, right? Some of you are also in my my terrorism class. You're going to find, and this is something that really bothered me the first time I taught both classes in the same semester. When I realized how much money was made for organized criminals as well as terrorists, I was put on the ground saying, you know, how do we pursue the American dream based upon this idea that I on my own will rise from the bottom to the top? And I think that, you know, if we take a look at the American dream for just a second, let me go into the American dream. Basically, the American dream espouses that we have the opportunity to move from one social class at birth to another social class when we get older, right? It's called intra-generational mobility, right? In other words, upward mobility in our lifetime. Rags to riches type of story, like Dave Thomas from Wendy's. Right? So when we're taking a look at within my life, generational mobility, that's something that we strive for. But the American dream is premised upon intergenerational mobility. And intergenerational mobility is this idea that you end up in a social class that was higher than your parents. So a lot of our parents, yours included, mine included, essentially they fought tooth and nail, some of them with next to nothing, so that we could have something, right? They gave up their lives so that we could have a better one than they had. The reason is because they wanted us to enjoy upward mobility. Upward mobility, social mobility, just basically means that you have a higher level of wealth or a higher level of income, all things being equal, to your parents. Okay? So that is really the root of the American dream, is upward mobility. Now, what's ironic about the concept of the American dream is that the American dream was coined, it was a Horatio Alger's myth, and it was coined in around 1931. You see, if you take a look at that period of time, because nothing happens by accident. I want you to remember this, okay? Remember that nothing happens by accident. Everything, including your life and the way your life is going to turn out, happens within a historical context. So the historical structures that exist today are going to be the ones that influence you 20, 30 years from now. For example, artificial intelligence, the responses to COVID-19. It's all these different things, you know, the way in which education is structured with No Child Left Behind, FCATS, the transactional instead of transformative type of education. All that's going to have an impact down the road. So you were shaped by this context, right? So hold on a second. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. My phone rang. My phone is based upon My Hero Academia. I don't know if any of you know what that is. It's a what's it called? A manga from Japan that my two daughters love, and they've hooked me to it. So that is an All Might call coming in. You know, All Might's my guy, but Deku is my guy. Anyhow, we don't want to hear about that. So the American Dream is based upon this premise that we should be able to move up within our lifetime. And what we know is that intergenerational mobility is something that we strive for. However, when I was just discussing this idea of artificially changing the nature of the labor force, when we talk about COVID-19 changing the labor force, these are what you call structural forces, right? And those structural forces, when those 40 million people lost their jobs, that was downward mobility. It's called structural mobility, right? So structure influences the ability to be mobile. Now, there's a theory, all right? And a theory, and I know we're getting into stuff right off the bat, so I apologize for that, but I want to be able to set up your assignment so when you go to do your assignment for next week, you kind of have some background as to how to frame it. There are several theoretical positions in criminology that are pretty important. The three big ones, they're called grand theories, are conflict theory, functionalism, and symbolic interactionism. We're going to focus today more on conflict theory and more on functionalism because they are structural theories, which means essentially, and remember, watch that video, Who Am I? The structural theories are always going to focus on the macro, the large-scale forces in society, right? So the functionalists believe that the reason why the term American Dream came up in the 1930s, in 1931, is because there was an overwhelming sense of hopelessness across the nation at that time, right? You had the Great Depression, you know, you were just coming out of Prohibition, people are homeless, you know, you have Hoovervilles, you have people living in tent cities, bread lines all across the nation. You're talking about a 30% unemployment rate. People down living in Arkansas were shipped over and moved over to Tennessee and lived in tents because there were no jobs back on the Arkansas side. So there were so many negative things that they strive to come up with the idea of hope. How do you utilize hope to create a system where people who are losing everything still believe that there's a better life ahead of them? And so they created this guy named Horatio Algiers, and basically the myth was that Horatio Algiers could go from rags to riches if he played by the rules of society, right? And basically what that means is the concept of the American dream had a unifying effect. It was functional, right? It was functional for the stability of society. So if we take a look at theory, the functionalist theory makes the argument that the institutions of society, the economic institution, I hope you're taking notes, but if you're not, you can go back and watch it again. The political institution, the education institution, the family institution, criminal justice institution, religious institution, all these institutions work together to promote stability within society. All right? So, the idea of the American dream was to promote stability so that people would have hope, so that they wouldn't revolt, so that they would be able to continue trying to find work. And then when FDR came in with the what was it called? The WPA, people bought into it because it looked like a solution to our economic depression. Right, so all these things were very functional during a period of rapid change. Now, during a period of rapid change, where the norms break down, where we don't understand exactly what the new rules are, kind of like today, right? They're talking about what do they call it? The new way, the new method, the new journey, whatever it's called. I'm sounding like some people who are pretty famous trying to think of the new lifestyle, whatever it's called. But anyhow, they're making the argument that everything is new. But we don't know how to play in the new world, right? Some of us are really struggling with remote learning as opposed to virtual learning, as opposed to face-to-face learning, right? It's because we're not used to it, we're not comfortable with it. And what this is what they call anomie. Anomie is breakdown within the social system, right? So when there's breakdown in the social system, people are going to adapt. They adapt to those structural changes. Does that make sense? So in the 1930s, well, go back to 1919 with Prohibition. Once we had Prohibition and we made alcohol consumption and distribution illegal, you didn't eliminate the fact that people wanted to drink. You didn't eliminate the idea that people still wanted to go out and party, and it was still the Roaring 20s, so people wanted to go out to the taverns and the clubs, and they wanted to swing, right? They wanted to dance, and they wanted to party and do all those kind of things. And now all of a sudden you're saying that you can't do that. Well, the issue is that people still wanted to do those things. You know, people, there are alcoholics, there are heavy drinkers, there are people who like to socially drink, and so therefore, and by the way, the alcohol has been the social lubricant of the creation of the society entirely. Because if you think back to the 1700s, right, the water could have killed you because we didn't have the kind of filtration systems to keep the water clean. So what do they have to do? They have to distill the water, essentially making alcohol. So when the founding fathers were hanging out in the taverns in Philadelphia, they were drinking alcohol. So a lot of those decisions they were making were under the influence of alcohol. All the way, are you serious? New York City? All those people moving to New York City, you think the water was clean? No, Tammany Hall, where a lot of the organized crime arose, if you watch the gangs in New York, right? The 5 Points, that's a real place in Manhattan. Well, during that period of time, alcohol was a very important social lubricant because it's not all they could drink, but it was something that was readily available for the fact that water filtration systems just didn't exist, and you had all these people, you know, where does waste go? And by the way, the eastern part of Manhattan is built on junk. You know, so when people dump their trash off into the bay, into the harbor, over time it built up, and that's where you get West Manhattan. It's basically a landfill, right, coming out of the 1800s because there was no place to put the trash, right? So when we take a look at these contexts, it is the context that gives rise to the adaptation. When there is social breakdown, there are groups that are going to adapt to that breakdown. And Robert Merton, M-E-R-T-O-N, Robert Merton called this structural strain theory. Essentially, people are going to either be conformists, they're going to accept the old rules and continue to follow them, you know, hoping to get the same outcome. Or they're going to accept the outcome, wealth, right, but they're going to adapt and engage in illegal behavior, right? They're going to be innovators. Then there's going to be people who, you know, I give up, man. I give up. I'm just going to disappear, right? I'm going to become a drug addict. I become a drug addict. You know, opioids, I'm not trying to do anything. I just want my next fix, right? In other words, they disappear. They become retreatists, right? Others that you see in the protests and the counter-protests, what are they trying to do? They're trying to change the system as we know it. So those are rebels, right? But all of them are adapting to the same structural strain. So when we take a look at what the different groups are saying, they're saying the same thing. We don't know what to do. The structure has changed before our eyes, and so therefore we're going to adapt. And the other group that adapts are what they call the ritualists. They forget the rules and they forget the goals, but they forget the goals, but they continue to follow the rules even though the rules don't apply anymore. They're called bureaucrats. So many of us become very frustrated with bureaucrats simply because of the fact that, you know, they follow rules, but they don't understand, you know, I'm trying to make a better life, and you're kind of getting in the way. Can you change the rules because I'm a good person? You know, those of you who are trying to get a college education, and the bursar said, no, you can't come in, or financial aid or what have you, because you don't have your check yet. Well, you have the skill, you have the talent, you have the desire, but the ritualist is going to say, no, I got to follow this rule here, so you can't get in. And if you think about how the rules circumvent your life, you can see that ritualists are really important as far as maintaining the order. So basically, I'm not going to talk about conflict theory right here. Real quickly, conflict theory just makes the assumption that all those institutions work in favor to promote the position of the wealthy, all right? Education, et cetera, et cetera. They all work together to promote the position of the wealthy. So the poor get exploited at the hands of the rich. The proletariat, which is the poor, get exploited for the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie therefore thrive. Now, and therefore, often what you see is that organized criminal syndicates arise among the poor, because their wealth, they've been exploited, and all the money within their community has gone up to those who own the property and own the land. So therefore, they have to band together and adapt as a group. And they're alienated, so they come together as an alienated group, and they build something. And what do they build? They build an organized syndicate. And it is through that group formation that they can actually generate profits. It's just like any other corporation. So if you think of organized crime, think of it in terms of organization. All right? I'm about to assign you your cities. Boy, I hope you watched all the way through, because I'm not answering any questions that are in this video. So I don't want to hear about, I didn't get a city. No, yeah, you're about to get a city. So just, pay attention to that. Now, with this assignment, I really want you to watch that video on how to write a great paper. Because in that paper, even though it's only 2 pages, you're still going to write the word introduction. You're going to put an introduction. Then you're going to put a background. What is the background that gave rise to organized crime in Akron? Right? What was going on? What is the theory you're going to use? You're probably going to use anomie theory, right? Which you can look up. It's A-N, let me go ahead and put it in here. Anomie theory. Anomie theory. Anomie theory. Or you could call it, hey darling, structural strain theory. Either one. Robert K. Merton. And what I want you to do is I want you to go into Google Scholar. And when you go into Google Scholar, what I would like for you to do is use the key term. Organized crime, then you have to write the word A-N-D, capital A, capital N, capital D, organized crime, and Chicago. And if you want, you can say, and functionalism, or, and strain theory, or, and anomie, or, and conflict theory. Okay, I mean, you choose what you want. I would go look them all up on your own, okay, which you can do. And then you're just going to write an organized paper. Introduction, background, theory. Data might be hard for you to get, so don't worry about data so much, but not for this one, maybe for later. But then you have to have an analysis section and then conclusion. Now, I want you to use that structure. Introduction, background, theory, analysis, conclusion. Practice that. You practice that, you're going to start getting A's in all your classes. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start assigning cities to each of you. All right? City number 1, Dialin Alfonso. You have, ironically, Akron. Meshari Altura, Cleveland. Diana Baldizan, Detroit. Right? Jennifer Baldizan, which I imagine that you two are siblings. I'm giving you a break. I'm giving you New York. Now, when you do New York, you might want to either focus in on Brooklyn or Manhattan, or break it down to something smaller, since it was such a complicated situation in New York City. Ali Bates, Newark, New Jersey. Isabella Bayomo, Miami. I'm sure you like that. Oh, by the way, when you do this assignment, you can go back historically. It doesn't have to be today. It can be today, but you might have to go back to 1922. You might have to go back to 1830. So do thorough research. I'm going to be looking to see how deeply you go. Johan Campos, Los Angeles. Diana Charles, who, thanks for the email, I appreciate that the other day. San Francisco. Renee Conde, you get my hometown, Toledo, Ohio. Might seem boring. It's not boring. Toledo and the Mafia is something pretty big. All right, Amanda Cantador, Philadelphia. Lucienne Cordero, Chicago. Aren't you lucky? Jada Curry, Washington, D.C. Anna Del Rio, New Orleans, Louisiana. Maurice Diaz, Las Vegas, Nevada. Samantha Dumais, Kansas City. Victoria Duran, Atlantic City. Karen Espino, Buffalo, New York. Joel Philippe, I'm not sure which, I'm sorry. Boston, Noel Flowers. Noel Flowers, Brooklyn. Keisha Frederick, The Village, New York City. Let me see here. Jonathan Giraldo, we're going to circle back around now. You're going to get Akron. Juan Gomez, Cleveland. Steve Gomez, Detroit. Heron, what's going on, baby? I haven't seen you in a while. Gonzalez, New York City. Nakisha Hargett, Newark. Aaron Harrison, Miami, Florida. Let's see here. Kimberly Mejia Nunez, I would like for you to do Los Angeles. Queenette Minter, San Francisco. No, you know what? Do Philadelphia. Queenette Minter, do Philadelphia. Melanie Molina, have you do Chicago. Kimberly Montero, Washington, D.C. Bridget Obando, New Orleans. Cynthia Oscar, Las Vegas. Julie, how are you? Pasalotos, there we go. Atlantic City. Karina Ponce, Buffalo. Anthony, good seeing you again. Boston. Anthony Porras, sorry. Samantha Ramirez, Brooklyn. Jocelyn Rosales, New York City. Lindsay Sosa Gutierrez, I'd like for you to do Queens, New York. And Maria Vergara, how about you do Long Island, New York? All right, so those are your assignments. I've given you some background on your approach and how I'd like for you to do this. I would like for you to make sure, and I'll put the link in there for you. Hello, Alexa. How are you? This is for organized crime. I imagine you got an alert. So it doesn't apply to you, I don't believe. So anyhow, I would like for you to kind of review this video, take a look at your cities, watch that video, watch those two videos. The first video is Who Am I? And the other one is How to Write a Great Paper. And in your research, I'd like for you to use Google Scholar. That's where your citation should come from. But you may also have to use just a broader Google search. Don't just use a Google search in Wikipedia. I want you to go in there, use Google Scholar. All right? Well, that takes care of our first meeting. I just want to say, welcome to Organized Crime. I'm going to be largely hands-off. I'm going to just kind of guide you with the written assignments. And the written assignments are definitely going to teach you a lot more than you ever expected to learn about organized crime, both in America and abroad. Right? Now, if you take a careful look at your syllabus, all right, you will see that we answered question 1 today as well. So I'm trying to make it so everything ties together for you. I wish you a great semester. I hope you love the class, and I will be seeing you again soon. Watch that announcement board.